What's up, everybody? It's me, Coach Mills here, and today we're going to be breaking down the new patch Overwatch 2 meta by telling you exactly what tanks are best and worst and what characters you should be playing alongside these tanks. You have to understand that every single composition all centers around the tank, so knowing which one is actually the strongest and ways to counter each one is going to be incredibly helpful. So let's jump right in, but do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe. We're almost at 50,000 subscribers, and I should be live right now on stream. You can check it out in the description down below. Now, so the first character that we definitely got to talk about is Ramatra. Ramatra is incredibly powerful and has become a huge winner as we've moved away from the previous Hog meta. While there are other characters that can brawl a Ramatra, Reinhardt could get in there, Junker Quinn can get in there, Orisa can get in there. Because of Ramatra's flexibility, Ramatra gets to do whatever is best for the matchup. If you need a poke from distance, you can poke and use your Nemesis form very passively. If you want to actually bully up on the enemy target, let's say it's a Sigma, you can do so, and you can use your Nemesis form to close the gap, and in a lot of cases, you can even use it to make aggressive plays on the enemy backline, just straight up killing enemy DPS and supports. Ramatra's ultimate is also just completely absurd, incredibly powerful, and I think that Ramatra is actually one of the strongest tanks in the game right now, and we're putting him up in S tier. Now, as far as what characters you can play with Ramatra, Ramatra is very flexible as a tank, so what DPS and supports you can play with Ramatra is really varied. I think you could play Ramatra in a traditional poke composition that can pivot into a more brawly composition to close out a fight. So you could play it with characters like Ashe and Sojourn and Widowmaker, but you could also play a Ramatra with closer range characters like Tracer hypothetically, Afar Mercy. I mean, the list goes on and on. This character is a very flexible tank, so you're going to see a lot of diversity in the characters around Ramatra. Next up, let's talk about Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is a tank that is actually just on the cusp of being completely absurd, and that's always the case with Wrecking Ball. You make him a little bit too strong, you give him a little bit too much damage, or make him impossible to kill, and yeah, he can just run rampant. But right now, unfortunately, there are some characters that can kind of keep him in check a bit. Specifically, Orisa keeps him in check a lot, and then some general CC, things like Sleep Dart, are pretty good against Hammond. All in all, though, if you play Hammond with a composition that wants to dive in, so let's say like a Tracer, maybe like an Echo Mercy, something along those lines, all of a sudden Hammond can be fantastic. And I do think that he's pretty powerful, although there are other options, other tanking options that just are more flexible, more objectively powerful, and you don't have to like get your entire team to play around you. So yeah, I'm gonna put him at the top of C tier. Yeah, still not a bad tank by any means. Keep in mind on this list, the weakest tank is actually still pretty powerful, and the disparity between the strongest and weakness is actually not as wide as like the DPS or the supports. So I would say that even the weakest tank is still playable if you play in the right situation or you have the skill behind the character to make it work. Now let's talk about Diva. Now Diva's a really interesting one because Diva is a great character, but it just feels like Diva isn't doing anything busted, is what I would say. It's a character that can do what they're supposed to do and do their job, but isn't really going above and beyond and kind of taking over a game entirely. I do think that Diva is incredibly good against characters like Ashe, characters like Widowmaker, contesting high grounds, and if we had more verticality in the map pool right now, I think Diva would be a slam dunk pick. But right now, you don't really want to be stuck on Diva or always on Diva. If you're a tank player, you're more of an enabler on Diva and a peeler rather than a playmaker like you could be on some of the other tanks. Still, if you're really, really amazing on Diva, I think you can really bully the enemy team and get a lot of pick value, but she's just not as dominant as some of the other tanks. So for those reasons, I'm putting her up in the B tier. More reliable, very flexible. You could play her in a lot of compositions, but just not as objectively powerful as some of the higher picked tanks. Next up, let's talk about Winston. Now, Winston's a really interesting one because I think Winston in the right hands is one of the best tanks. Very good matchup against Orisa, very good matchup against Zarya, great matchup against characters even like Ramatra. I think that Winston, when played well, can play around a Ramatra really, really easily because Ramatra doesn't have something that can easily punish a Winston in the same way that like a Roadhog hook could. Now, That being said, I think that you still need like a certain amount of characters that are going to play around you, and it's going to be pretty hard to like play a Winston with like a Junkrat hypothetically or something like that. But on some of the maps, and basically like all of the King of the Hill maps, and if you have a team that's willing to work with you and you're really good at Winston, Winston can be amazing. I actually am going to put Winston up into the A tier. Really, really strong. And we even saw like in regions like Korea, Winston was already the best tank before Hog got nerfed. And I can just only imagine that he is just like the top of the S tier in GM Plus in Korea. And I think that a lot of people are kind of catching wind of that a little bit now. Let's move on to Zarya. And Zarya is a tank that is in a weird spot, right? Very, very strong, can keep charge for a long time. But unfortunately, there's a couple of problems with Zarya. I think a couple of weaknesses that we have to consider. The first one is, while Zarya can definitely bully up on some matchups, like Zarya is really good against like an Orisa, right? There are other matchups that they just ignore the Zarya entirely. They poke her out from distance like a Sigma. They just basically dive past her like a Winston. They play keep away, or maybe with the Ramatra, he just doesn't allow the Zarya to ever get close, picks his battles, and can play around a Zarya. Now, if you can find a way or a composition that gets you bubble value outside of just self-bubbling and just brawling on the front line, I think that you can get Zarya to work in a ton of different situations. But for the most part, Zarya's in this weird, like, box or this weird bubble where I think that there's some better options at doing what she could specifically do. Still one of the best characters to hard carry yourself if you want to get out of some of the lower ranks on tank. But yeah, let's actually put Zarya in the B tier. I could see the meta developing and Zarya becoming more and more powerful. But for now, we're going to keep her right around the B tier. I think with Diva doing really powerful things, just not really doing anything unfair. Junker Queen. Junker Queen's another weird character because she's gotten a ton of buffs. And she's really, really strong in a lot of ways. But she is just a little bit weaker at doing what she's great at, brawling, than multiple other characters. Namely, the Nemesis farm on Ramatra, that brawl is really strong. Zarya's brawl is really strong. Orisa's brawl is really strong. So, like, Junker Queen really doesn't have that great of a place. I definitely think you could play Junker Queen, and I think especially if you could find something to enable with your rally, I think with your cry, it's going to be really strong. But your ultimate is something that's not going to get a crazy amount of value up against the Kiriko. You're not going to be able to have as much crazy high impact as like characters like Ramatra, characters like Orisa, even Sigma. I think that all of those characters have better ultimates or more reliable ultimates when you're up against Kiriko. And in general, I think the characters are still a little bit underpowered, which is weird to say because she's so strong. Like, they've done so much to her. Maybe it's just Ramatra and Orisa being too powerful. Maybe that's actually what it is. And I honestly, thinking about it a little bit more, that makes the most sense. If they tuned down Orisa, they tuned down Ramatra, and kept Junker Queen in her current state, I have no doubt that Junker Queen would see more play. But yeah, I mean, rally, like speeding in with extra health, not really that great when you're going up against like pocketed DPS from range or characters like Widow and things like that. I'm actually putting Junker Queen at the top of C tier. I can see the argument for the bottom of B, somewhere around there, to be honest. But yeah, another character that is phenomenal when you're not in the highest ranks or you're in some of the lower ranks. You can make a lot of sick plays with this character. For the most part, I'm still going to keep her around that rank. Doomfist. Now, this one might be a little bit controversial. Y'all know that I'm doing a Doomfist to GM on stream, and I'm having a lot of freaking fun on Doomfist, primarily because I am not going up against nearly as many freaking Roadhogs. And even going up against Roadhogs, like, I played against them before and it was fine for the most part, but it's just like getting multiple hit by CC, like getting slept into hook or all this crazy stuff. Definitely very, very frustrating and annoying. I think Doom is in a much better place than they were before. And a lot of people are going to say that Doom is super, super weak, super underpowered, but you can play Doom against a lot of the top tanks. I think Orisa is probably your hardest matchup, and that's not close. But you can definitely play Doom against characters like Sigma. You can play Doom against characters like Ramatra. Both of these characters cannot punish you, like, at all. Like, if you get hit by a rock, but that's one cooldown, and you can cancel his block, you can zone away Nemesis and Ramatra's ultimate. You're actually really good at peeling a Winston. You don't really care about a Diva. So there's a lot of characters that you have a pretty decent matchup against. And especially if you have the skill to back you up, you can do a lot on this character. I'm actually going to put this character at the bottom of B tier, but it could vary, of course, depending on your individual skill. As far as what characters you want to play with a Doomfist, like what works best with the Doomfist, mainly characters that are going to actually leverage when you get those big punches and the cooldowns that you bait out. Because oftentimes when you get a charge punch with Doom, you go in and you punch multiple people. Let's say you punch like an Ana, Kiriko, and a DPS, right? You're typically going to bait out Suzu. You're typically going to bait out Nade. Maybe you're going to bait out a lot of sleeps just by existing, and you would like to have a character like Tracer, hypothetically, that will actually leverage the fact that you're baiting out all these and turn that into some form of playmaking or aggression, where they maybe couldn't do that without you baiting those out, but once you do, they can follow up. Also, characters like Pharah, Mercy, Echo, anything that's like going to be able to contribute to your semi-dives, your really big punches, something that could be an aggressive off-angler like Soldier. There's a lot of characters I think can work pretty well with Doomfist. And Zen is surprisingly good with the Doom. I mean, you can't really peel that well against most characters as Doom, but if your Zen discords just about anything, you can completely obliterate it as Doomfist. It's pretty cool. Now, let's talk about Rein. And this is another one that it's kind of rough. Like, Rein mains are having a rough time. If we just think about how the meta has kind of progressed, how there's a lot of pocketed DPS, there's flying DPS, there's tracers. If we think about like all of the top ones, let's see, Widowmaker, Tracer, pocketed Sojourn, pocketed Ashe, Pharah, Echo. Like, there's so many characters, right? All of these characters want to take aggressive off angles. They want to go and do their own thing. They want to spam damage from afar. Rein just can't really do that much to any of that. What Rein really is great at is brawling on the front line. He is the best brawler in his effective range. He's better than any other character. He can just beat you down, build up a crazy amount of ultimate, output a ton of damage, and shatter, right? But a lot of characters are going to play keep away. A Ramatra is going to play keep away with you. They're never going to engage you unless it's on their terms. An Orisa is going to spam you out and not fight you unless they're at a huge advantage and you're low on your cooldowns, low on your shield, and you're gonna get CC'd to hell. Sigma's gonna spam you from distance. Doomfist is gonna completely avoid you or just get huge punches against you. Yeah, I mean, Rein, just unfortunately, all the characters that work the best with him are just not that good, unfortunately. And I'm actually gonna have to put Rein down in the D tier. It is what it is. I'm sorry, some of y'all might be a little peeved by this, but I think that metas are better when Rein is better. I would love it if Blizzard would make Rein more meta. But I honestly think that he's the weakest tank right now, and it's really not close. I really don't think it's close. I definitely think you could still get him to work on some maps, and especially if you have a Lucio and players that are willing to like brawl with you like aggressively. Sure, you can definitely make him work, and if your opponents are making a lot of mistakes positionally, you could definitely get a huge amount of value on Rein. Any Rein player that's like in GM right now, and I only know of a couple, those guys are so freaking good at the game that they can make them work because they're just that good. And they would be able to get that rank a lot easier on many other tanks. Next up, let's talk about Sigma. Sigma's a tank that I think is really, really good. Really great at poking. There's some maps that are really favored for this character. Works really well with long distance poke fights with, let's say, Widowmaker, even Hanzo, Ashe Pocket, Sojourn Pocket. I really think that this character is really, really strong. Not going to be great on every single map. Pretty poor against high ground. Doesn't want characters that go all around him. Like, he's pretty weak to characters that want to flank him, characters like Tracer. But, and he's not great on like Koth maps where enemies are just naturally going to be coming from multiple directions. But for a lot of the more linear payload maps, I think he is one of the best tanks to be doing, and he can completely oppress the enemy team. So I'm actually putting him in the A tier. Pretty strong, pretty strong. Great ultimate too. Now let's talk about Roadhog. This is another one that people don't really know where to place, right? Roadhog is a weird pick, right? Because he doesn't one-shot technically, although you can kind of get it off if you're tricky with it, or if they have taken any damage or you put some damage onto a target. And even if you don't one-shot, you get to output a bit more damage. So he's actually pretty good at just like shooting a little bit on the front line, actually being in some of those brawls. But let's think about it a bit. If we think about Roadhog as like a brawler, he's like weaker than Junker Queen at brawling, definitely weaker than Zarya at brawling, definitely like weaker than Orisa at brawling. And Orisa's still the best, like one of the best tanks to play right now. So all the power that you could get out of Roadhog, and even if you were playing, let's say you were playing against an Orisa, you could oftentimes force through hooks. That's what I would do a lot of the time. I would force through little cheeky hooks from the high ground, cheeky go on an off angle really quick and hook someone. I could press Sojourns that are being pocketed and guarantee kill them. These type of things are just not the case anymore. And it means that the counters that you already had on Roadhog are just that much more polarizing. On Orisa, these characters just completely shut you down. I'm not saying that you can't get Hog to work, and he can't be a character that is really good still against many of the things that, like I think you're good against Wrecking Ball, Doomfist, Winston. You're generally good against some DPS, but yeah, the power level is lower. Kind of what we talked about with characters like this, but I think the power level is even lower than that. I'm actually gonna put Hog probably like here, maybe here, somewhere in the C tier. I don't know if he deserves high or low, but somewhere along the line. I could even see like this being the case. I'm gonna still keep it like that. That's where I would put Hog. I think he's still better than Rein, which says something about Rein, and his ultimate's still good. The CC is still strong. Just a lot of these tanks just do it a bit better. Unfortunately, they just do it a bit better. Although, one thing about Hog that's cool is he's actually pretty good against Ramatra, because you can ult away the Ramatra ult. You could hook the Ramatra through his block. It's pretty good, but it's not good enough to make Hog amazing or anything like that. Because, let's talk about Orisa. And surprise, surprise, but Orisa is the best tank in the game. Phew, wow, who would have guessed it when they super buffed Orisa and they didn't nerf Orisa afterwards? I mean, they nerfed Orisa like super slightly. But anyways, Orisa's super strong. You can randomly kill people in the mid fight. You're very, very good at sustaining fights. You're good at poking out. You're good at brawling. You're hard to punish. You can have a crazy high impact over the game. And just because of the best characters that are played right now, Orisa works really well with all the long distance hit scans. Like every long distance hit scans, including Sojourn. I'm going to include Sojourn as a hit scan. Yeah, Orisa's just amazing. I think that the battle right now you're gonna see most often is really Ramatra and Orisa. Either Ramatra mirrors, Ramatra via Orisa. And in the direct matchup, I think Orisa, like, in general, has a slight edge because your spear is just so fucking strong. But if you're a really, really good Ramatra, or you're just a better Ramatra, a better tank, you can make up that difference really easily. Now, like I said, I think it's interesting because we're still in a rock, paper, scissors tank meta. Like, Winston has a good matchup or can work against both these tanks. In my personal opinion, characters like Tracer with a Winston together and an aggressive Kiriko, you can just do some crazy things. Even a Zen, I think, can work really well at combining with the dive to really punish some of the most played tanks, aka the S tier tanks. I think that Sigma on the maps he's good is amazing. Even against Orisa, even against Ramatra, you can just distance them out and poke them out, force them in a poke, never let them brawl, and you can leverage your advantage that way. And like the majority of the tanks on this roster, I think, can work in the right situations. But yeah, these are going to be the most powerful. And I think that this is my definitive meta tier list. I think that this kind of lines directly up with my DPS tier list that I did previously. If you haven't seen that, you can go check that out. But yeah, definitely let me know what nerfs you want to see. Personally, I would want to see an increase in cooldown time on some of Orisa's abilities, and I would love to see Ramatra's ultimate not be infinite, and then maybe some Rein buffs. And I think that I would probably be okay with that, but you tell me, how do you feel about this meta? How do you feel about this tier list? What is your favorite tank to grind right now? And yeah, definitely let me know how you feel in the comments down below. Smash that like, subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you next time.